On behalf of the Durham District School Board of Trustees, welcome to the Standing Committee meeting of March 1st, 2021. This meeting will now come to order. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none. Are there any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda is approved as distributed. I see no community or DDSB presentations tonight, so we'll move on to item 7, the director's update, and I'll call on our director, Nora Marsh.
Thank you. Through you, Chair Thatcher, want to continue the practice of updating the Board of Trustees in terms of pandemic management and impact on school operations. This last 2 weeks has seen incredible number of initiatives come through provincially that schools have had to adapt to. In particular, on 3 different occasions, updating our health and safety protocols in terms of COVID-19 management. In particular, looking at compulsory eyewear now for staff within schools, the compulsory screening and reporting out of secondary school screening prior to their day at school, and continued practice then in terms of COVID-19 screening for K-12. One of the most important things in that screening tool that the province introduced last week was the management that it went from if you had potential COVID symptoms of 2 or more to self-isolate, and they have reduced that now to 1 or more. So certainly that is having a significant impact in terms of attendance at schools. From a staffing perspective, we know that there's been a shortage of educators in Ontario throughout this year, and the Durham District School Board has, the staff have worked diligently in terms of ensuring that classes are safely supervised and schools are operating under safe conditions with staff there. We approached it in September with a tiered implementation so that when we knew we didn't have sufficient occasional teachers or EAs, looking to do a central reallocation in terms of staff from the education center going out and supporting the active learning for students in classrooms. With this new implementation of being self-isolating with 1 incident, did want to flag for trustees and for the community that we are looking to update our emergency lists in terms of having occasional teachers and EAs available should we exhaust the central allocation of staff at the education center, but also want to flag that as we make our way through this period, it may be more likely that a school needs to close due to the lack of available staff to ensure the safe supervision of students. Of course, this would be a last resort, and we have a number of tiers in advance of having to get to that decision. But with this new management of the screening, understanding it's a health and safety protocol and the importance of that, but that we are concerned in terms of the staffing shortages. And this, of course, is happening throughout Ontario, and I think Durham has been well positioned throughout. We haven't yet had to close down for this reason, which is some other districts have experienced acute shortages, but wanted to make sure that we were flagging for you that with this shift that it could be more likely. So that is the major update in terms of the operational impact of pandemic management over the last 2 weeks. I want to publicly thank staff have just continued to be incredible in terms of adapting to a changing situation. And I also want to acknowledge our students who have remained so positive in their learning throughout this period. And I think a fine example of that, in fact, is the Student Senate, who've just been doing such incredible work connecting both elementary and secondary students in growing a positive culture of care throughout. But we recognize that it's been very challenging and that these pivots in terms of changes in practice have taken the require adaptation during a period of time when we know people are very tired in terms of what they're managing, but also staying very focused on student well-being and student learning, and really want to say how inspiring the work is that is happening both in our virtual school as well as our in-person schools during this period. So I'm happy to take any questions in terms of the new health and safety protocols or any other pandemic related question from trustees. Thank you, Chair Thatcher.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Are there any questions or comments for Director Marsh? Go ahead, Trustee Barnes.
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. Director Marsh, I just wondered if we have any update in regards to the testing that should be, I would try to say the word, but I'm going to get tongue-tied, systematic testing.
Through you, Chair Thatcher, Trustee Barnes, I follow you. Asymptomatic testing. So we have been working with the Ministry of Education and Durham Region Health Department in terms of launching that within the Durham region. We've worked in partnership with Durham Catholic because where the testing is occurring, it's regional, and so we are working together in terms of offering a regional approach. We launched the first clinic on Saturday. Communities will become aware through a direct communication from the school in terms of when it's happening within their community and the date and times that it's happening. There's an opportunity to register yourself online so that you have an appointment time, as well as arriving to the testing site. They encourage you to sign up in advance. They occur in the evenings and on Saturdays. And in fact, Acting Associate Director Markovsky did visit the site last Saturday for the first one, which was at Richardson. So I don't know if you want to just report briefly on in terms of the management of it there.
Thank you, Director Marsh. As Director Marsh had mentioned, Trustee Barnes, I did stop by there on the weekend. Our vendor that has been assigned by the ministry is Life Labs. They did an excellent job. It was very orderly. We had over 100 people show up this past weekend, and we have 3 sites that will be continuing throughout the month of March, and we'll be reevaluating, looking at a monthly schedule going forward. But there's nothing much more that I would add. Director Marsh captured that quite beautifully. Thank you.
The only other thing I'll add is that, of course, the geographic selection is based on health data. So Durham Region Health Department really drives that health data, and then the Ministry of Education provides further direction in terms of location. So those decisions are made based on that data, not based on us.
Okay, thank you. And just a follow-up, is it the quick test that they are doing? Like the nasal swabs, do we know? No.
So thank you, and through you and Trustee Barnes, we were informed when I went there on the weekend. My understanding is that they were doing just the traditional testing,
Okay.
but my understanding is that there will be a combination of both rapid testing and the traditional testing going forward. Other than that, I know an individual who went to the site and they had their results back that same evening. So it's a rather quick turnaround in terms of when individuals are getting their results.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And going to Trustee Edwards. Go ahead, Donna.
Trustee Barnes somewhat asked the question that just that, you know, for ease of mind of parents, etc., especially for those students that who, or even some people that have some fears that the nasal testing or it is not appropriate in order to get the, ease of mind. The rapid testing is more appropriate for the individuals, and if that was available. So what you're saying is they're supposed to get it, but at this point in time, that's not what they've been doing.
Associate Director Markowski.
And thank you, and Trustee Edwards. I don't have confirmation. I could look into that if both testing was utilized this past weekend. The communication that we received is that there will be both the traditional and the rapid test. And actually, if you leave that with me, perhaps I could follow up through the director.
Sorry, I'll just add to that. I honestly don't think we know what they're doing each time. I think it is based on test availability. And my understanding is for them, the rapid tests aren't necessarily as available. That's my understanding. So I'm a little bit concerned about us becoming playing telephone a little bit in terms of what they're able to offer. What I would suggest for families booking, if that is of concern to them, that they flag that in the booking with the provider, because we won't have control over that that element of it. And again, the testing will occur by the end of March. Every region in every school community in the Durham region will have that opportunity, but whether or not they'll have access to which test, I think that will vary depending on provincial availability.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting us to be able to get in between, but it would just be nice to sort of provide families to say that if they need the rapid testing and they can't do the other testing, to when they book it, to just give them that information to provide that. Yeah.
All right, let's go to Trustee Crawford.
Thank you. Just on the numbers, 100 seems rather low. What would have been the potential there of people that could have showed up? Because I noticed that you could have either booked or dropped by. What kind of numbers were we expecting, Superintendent?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. If you're looking, Trustee Crawford, in terms of the population of all the schools involved, there was probably about 3,500 in total. Now, we were informed by Life Labs, as they are running provincial sites across the province in relation to this, that usually they have anywhere between a 10 to 20% that show up. They had 100 individuals that pre-registered. When I went there in the afternoon, they had visited, there was about 100 individuals that visited. So I don't know where it ended in total. I would say it was over 100. But overall, you're probably looking at anywhere between, I'd say, a 5 to 15% show up.
Supplemental, Trustee Crawford.
And you mentioned that some of the results were back right away. So do we know what the rate of infection is yet, or is it too soon for the sampling to tell us that?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. So Trustee Crawford, any information in relation to positive cases would work through the Durham Region Health Department, and then it becomes a case management issue. We don't have reports that are provided to us. That would go directly to the ministry.
So we're only providing subjects then?
Right, so we're treating this very much as a community use, where Life Labs comes in partnership with the ministry. They come in and provide the service, and it's accessible, as Director Marsh mentioned, to all our communities. It's on a rotating schedule. So 2 out of the 3 sites would be in areas within Durham that have a high number of COVID cases. And the 3rd site is a rotating municipal site to ensure that we're providing access to the various municipalities within the region.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. And Trustee Stone.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Trustee Crawford really asked my question, which was, at what point do you get the results? Does the board receive the results? I didn't know whether or not it was the same time or not, or if that's likely fairly private information. So I think you answered it. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions or comments, item 8 on your agenda, recommended items. Seeing none, moving on to information items. the FSL review, the supplementary report, will speak, Director Marsh will speak first. Go ahead, Director Marsh.
Thank you very much. Just wanted to provide some introduction before turning it over to the team who will lead the way through the report. You may recall that we did bring the French review to trustees, and at that time there were a number of questions in terms of the concept of capping. And so as a result of that standing committee meeting, we went away and did a bit more work in terms of explaining the potential for capping within the Durham District School Board. You'll also note, and we'll walk through the community consultation in terms of what we've heard since the original comprehensive consultation that we did. And there were a lot of questions there from the community in terms of capping as well. So it's for that reason that we want to dig a little bit more deeply. I think one of the fears is that capping was a reduction in service versus the management of proportionate growth of French immersion to the growth of the district overall. And so we're hoping to be able to unpack that a little bit more with you this evening and answer your questions in relation to that. And I believe Associate Director Wright is going to begin the conversation, and then we'll turn it over to Superintendent Lazarus.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Marsh, and through you, Madam Chair. As a follow-up to the French as a second language review provided to you in January, the report this evening includes details on what capping might look like across the district. Capping, as Director Marsh just said, is not intended to necessarily reduce the number of students who are accessing French immersion, but to strategically manage the future growth of the program to align both with available resources and proportionally to the growth of the district as a whole. The current percentage of grade 1 students entering French immersion is about 23. You'll see on page 3 of the report that what capping entry into the immersion program at both 20 and 25%, just as examples, would look like versus the number of students who actually did enter in 2019. So for comparison, you can see 20% brings the number down slightly, 25 up slightly. Page 5 of the report provides an outlook of those numbers over a few years based on projected enrollment. So that's the future looking graph. Item 1.2 on page 4 of the report speaks to how capping could work. The program, the French immersion program, would be well advertised and promoted in the fall to ensure parents were aware of registration dates. Students would be selected randomly after registering for the program, providing access to students on an equal basis. Spaces at French immersion schools that do not get filled by students within the zone boundary would be available to students outside of the zone, again on a randomly selected basis. This would maximize participation in the program, but within the cap that's set by trustees. Over time, as trends become apparent, boundary adjustments may be required, but that would happen over the course of the next few years to see where things settled out. So hopefully that paints a little bit of a better picture for capping, and Margaret will take us through some of the feedback received. Thank you.
Thank you. Superintendent Lazarus. Margaret,
You're muted.
you're muted.
Thank you. So as part of our FSL review's ongoing public consultation process, which included over the past 14 months,
Sorry, your volume is low.
Included thought exchange. Can you hear me better now?
Better.
Included thought exchanges, virtual public consultation sessions, and surveys that we distributed to our parent and guardian community, as well as our community members. Also, we consulted with our staff, with teachers, with educational assistants. So we did a fair amount of consultation over the past 14 months. And an additional opportunity, as Director Marsh said, was provided for our community members to provide feedback on the draft report and recommendations through the designated FSL review email address that we had used throughout the process. And the FSL review committee sent a direct email to anyone who participated in the virtual consultation sessions. And in addition, an invitation was given sent out to all schools to put it on their websites and their newsletters so that we could get maximum input into the feedback from our community. Social media platforms were also used to promote and request feedback. We received 37 emails from our parent guardian community expressing their opinions concerns, suggestions regarding the recommendations that were brought forward in the review. And you have that in appendix. We provided you a summary in the report, plus we provided you with an appendix A that gave another summary. And then we provided the full report, the full comments that were given to us and I provided that via email to you last week. And so the comments that were given were a variety of comments. Some expressed opposition to some of the recommendations. Others recognized the need for change given the circumstances that we're facing in Ontario, as well as just in our board. And others provided suggestions for you as a board of trustees to consider as you deliberate. And I think throughout this extensive review process and draft report, we sought to find a balance, to provide a path to move forward to ensure the continuity of our French language learning and ensure that FSL programming is sustainable for the benefit of all students. So we're really appreciative of our community who did provide the feedback throughout the entire process, and to give you an idea of what their thinking is around the recommendations that we made. And so as you deliberate, we are grateful for their feedback, and we anticipate that you will have enough information to make a decision on how to move forward with our FSL programming. And thank you. And that ends what I have to say. And so we're happy to take questions at this time.
Thank you, Superintendent Lazarus. Stephen, were you going to be speaking? Was Stephen Neville speaking?
He wasn't. No,
All right.
thank you. I will add, though, one of the things I think that is different when we think about the proactive growth and strategic development of French immersion programs within the district. One thing that has changed is that the Ministry of Education has said that all new school builds need to be dual track. So one of the strategies that Durham has made use of previously in terms of as the demand for French immersion grows to create a single track French immersion school, that opportunity is no longer there in terms of managing the requests for French immersion. So I just wanted to flag that for trustees as well in terms of as we move forward, how do we manage increased requests for French immersion if it goes just based on request, and that strategy is a strategy that is no longer available to us, and wanted to make sure we registered that with you.
Thank you, Director. We have some questions. Going first to Trustee Forbes.
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. I think we've all had a lot of feedback from our communities. I was just wondering, in terms of the cap, I think there's a sense of concern about equity of access with the cap. And I was just wondering if you could go through, you know, I know it's random selection, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but so in terms of families, siblings, keeping them together, I'm just wondering how this works with a random selection, and also just if you could speak to that sense of concern about equity of access to the programming with a cap.
If I may,
Can you take the question, Superintendent Lazarus?
Dave, excuse me. So Superintendent Wright will answer the questions related to the cap.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, we had quite a debate actually at our senior admin table about whether or not priority would be given to siblings, families who had already enrolled in the French immersion program. In the end, the consensus was that no preference would be given to those families in that situation, and that it would be a fair playing field for everybody in terms of the entry into the French immersion program. So a percentage would be determined every year of spaces for the French immersion program, and it would be based on the grade 1 and projected numbers for the year. The percentage set by trustees will remain constant. For example, right now it's 23%. So if we went forward on 23%, it would fluctuate based on the growth of enrollment over time throughout. So it's equitable in that everybody has the same opportunity to get access to a French immersion program in that first year. Does that help?
Supplemental, Trustee Forbes?
Well, I have a fuller understanding. I can just see how that could be problematic for families and concerning. But in terms of opening up the program so that everybody has an equal chance from random selection or statistically, whatever stats say about random selection, to enter the program, if that's what I'm understanding. Okay, thank you.
And Trustee Barnes?
Thank you. I have a couple of questions because looking at the CAPIN, I noticed that it's not really addressing the ratio of English to French. That's one of the problems that we are struggling with right now with our dual track schools is the size of the French program to the English program and keeping the English program viable. So I noticed that the CAPIN didn't really address that piece. I don't know, that's a comment more than a question, unless there's something you want to add to that. But I wanted to check too, in regards to some of the other things that we've put on the table. Have we done anything about our hiring practices for French teachers? And my other question is, have we spoken to the French teachers that are teaching in our English stream to see why they wouldn't want to go back to the French stream? So just those my two questions.
So thank you, Trustee Barnes, for asking that question. Yes, we have been, we've partnered right now with HR to address the hiring practices. We have pool hiring right now. We have been given permission to do pool hiring of 25 teachers, certainly before September. And there was a 7.5 teachers also that we were allowed to hire this year for our elementary teachers. Also, we have, we've gotten 2 grants from OPSA, and we're offering full subsidies for our French teachers to take their AQ courses, FSL Part 1, because we know part of the issues that we discovered is the proficiency of our teachers and the qualifications. So we have 2 grants that we've offered full subsidies for teachers to take their Part 1 FSL and Part 2 FSL. And also, we also got another grant from OPSA where we're looking at our assessment, the testing that we do for hiring, to make sure that our teachers have support in when they are going to be going through the hiring process, and we are looking at that. We've also partnered with NTIP to address some of our issues with our that one-on-one support with our new French teachers so that they get the support that they need. In the spring also, what we do want to do is to provide memberships to some of the French organizations that we have that will support our French teachers as well, ACPI and CASAL, and the Ontario Modern Languages of Teachers Association. ACPI is the Canadian Association of Second Language Teachers. And so we're providing those memberships for our teachers that will help them to improve their proficiency in the French language. And there's other things that we have a committee right now where we are looking at strategies of incentivizing our teachers to remain in French and not to go to the English. For example, we want to provide, these are thoughts that we're thinking of, to provide bursaries for them to participate in intensive language programs in Quebec and any other locations where those programs are offered. So there's lots of things that we're doing. We want to create a video also, a promotion video. And I've already talked to Jonathan and Andrew, our videographers that do our meetings tonight. And so a promotional video that we want to create to take to our faculties when we do go there. We're also right now, we are part of the career fairs, and Danielle Hunter, the facilitator that works with me in the department, attends those career fairs with our HR workers. And so there's lots of things that we're doing and strategies that we want to put in place, because no matter what the decision is by the trustees or what decision we make as a board, we know that recruitment is really something that we really have to focus on. And so we are involved in a lot of different strategies to enhance our recruitment processes.
We've certainly moved ahead with the advanced pool hiring too for French teachers, which is something that is new for Durham. I think in terms of the proportionate management, I think that the capping strategy does actually keep in check then in terms of the English program and the French immersion program, because if it goes unchecked, we know that there are some districts out there where approximately 80% of students are choosing French immersion in grade 1, knowing that there's attrition later on. But what that really does do is impact English programming then in those youngest grades. So the capping does actually solve that challenge for us by making sure that as we move forward, the growth of French immersion stays proportionate to the growth of the district, keeping it at about the status quo in terms of what we currently offer.
Trustee Barnes, did you have a supplemental question?
No, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. I have a multitude of questions, so I'm going to try to condense them down into some kind of key points and ideas. So I just want to follow up on Trustee Forbes' question about equitable access, because, and I recognize the concern for families, and I share it, but I'm also concerned about what that process looks like, because often we rely on social media channels to disseminate information, and we have a significant swath of students who don't have access to those kinds of, and parents who don't have access to, sorry, I'm having a moment. So they don't have access to technology that will give them priority. So I just want to make sure we're building into that process something that allows parents who have language barriers or technology barriers or whatnot, the same opportunities that would be available to other parents who are really okay, I can't even end the sentence, I'm sorry. So other parents who have more proficiency with language or technology or access to it.
For sure, and thank you. That is something we discussed at length as well. So there are a few pieces. One is with the grade 1 access, you may recall, if the recommendations move forward as suggested, it's no longer a decision point at kindergarten in terms of attending a specific school for kindergarten. Everyone would go to their community school for kindergarten. That does provide us access to current Durham District School Board families, and it does equalize then the playing field in terms of trying to access and make sure that they've got the information. We've also very consciously said that it's not going to be an electronic registration solely. There will be an opportunity for paper version as well as electronic version. And one of the things we would do in terms of our outreach from a kindergarten perspective is making sure that in those communities that we know there could be increased vulnerabilities in terms of language barriers, that the schools are working with those families so that that's a well-recognized strategy in terms of ensuring equitable access based on a particular situation. So we don't want that to be the barrier, most definitely. And we're also providing an extended window. So we would launch it slightly earlier than we do now in terms of information about what a French immersion program looks like. It would not be a promotional evening, but it would be a factual evening so that everyone understands what French immersion is and is not, with the understanding that every child whose family chooses to go into the lottery system will have a place where they're supported throughout the duration of a French immersion program, trying to improve the attrition rate, improve the sustainability of the program in terms of people not leaving the program throughout. Then the lottery would be held on one day. So we would then inform families, and the communication plan would be such that it would be a comprehensive communication on the exact same day. And then there would be an opportunity, because there are out of area spots potentially available to families. And that is the one area where if you have access to transportation, we might see that there's an increase in terms of that's a barrier for a potential family. But we did think about providing that spot rather than not providing the spot did seem to make most sense in terms of meeting the threshold of the proportionate capping.
Trustee Lundquist, did you have another question?
I have several, but I'll just ask one more and then hoping that other trustees ask my other two. So the second one that I am struggling with conceptually is, it has been reported to me through several parents that their children are already challenged in high school in terms of accessing French language courses that give them what they need. And so they're leaving French immersion to take courses because they're not being offered in French. And I'm just wondering, have we looked at what kind of impact this is going to have on that? And the reason I ask that is because it just seems to me that we're still going to have an attrition rate, that we're not going to keep all of the students who register regardless of whether it's capped or not. And so the potential impact on students in high school seems pretty significant to me, especially if the attrition rate stays similar. So I don't know what our plan is for that, or if we have tackled that yet.
We have discussed that, and that is fairly, even districts where there's 80% of the students start in French immersion, it becomes more and more challenging at the secondary level because there's so many courses at secondary, especially in grades 11 and 12 as students start to specialize. And then French immersion courses tend to be a singleton. So if it bumps up against another singleton, so for example, if you're only able to offer one physics class and it's at the same time as the French immersion, so there is some timetabling management that needs to occur. What we are hoping though, because remember, while we're capping entry in grade 1, we are looking to introduce a late immersion program in grade 7. So that for those families who don't get access in grade 1, it's not to say that the French immersion pathway is closed to them permanently. They could then access the late immersion in grade 7. What we're hoping is that with that late immersion program, the students will have not don't have the same opportunity to leave the program from K to 6. They're only starting in grade 7. And so if we build a rich program in terms of thinking around 7 to 12, there's actually an opportunity to get a new wave of students in later on and potentially keep them engaged, so that what we're seeing in grade 9 are higher numbers of students going for that certification. They've only been in the program 2 years, and presumably they've made a very informed choice in terms of their desire of wanting it to be a 7 to 12 pathway. So like everything else, as we, and we've talked about a very slow phased in implementation of this plan so that we can monitor it carefully. The other thing we've spoken about at secondary, of course, in the world of the pandemic, is that one of the limitations that we've had traditionally in terms of number of students and being able to offer a section, there is potential, while it's not ideal, there is potential perhaps to think more flexibly in terms of how students enroll in a French immersion course, especially if they're in a smaller school where sections are more limited.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Marsh. I'm just going to move on then to Trustee Morton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I have two questions. The first one, I'm weighing the capping on one hand, but on the other hand, I'm looking at the enhanced core French. So starting core French in grade 1, but then French immersion classes beginning in grade 2. So obviously you have weighed these. I'm thinking that an alternative to the capping could be the enhanced core and then grade 2. Could you tell me the advantages of the capping?
Sorry, Trustee Morton, through you, Madam Chair. The advantages to the capping versus an enhanced core French, because they are going hand in hand, I think, in the proposal.
Right, but the capping on one hand, but then on the other hand, core French in grade 1, FI in grade 2.
I'm sorry, perhaps Superintendent Lazarus and Director Marsh could.
We are not recommending FI in grade 2. We're recommending that we continue with the FI starting in grade 1. And so I'm not really understanding the capping as compared to could you rephrase your question?
May I jump in just for a moment and let's see if we get there, Trustee Morton, and then if not. So I think one of the things, there's a connection between capping and enhancing core French programming. And so one of the things that the report indicated, the French review indicated, is that we do want to build a very vibrant core French program. And Superintendent Lazarus and the team really spoke, I think, about that in the first time we discussed this. But to increase access to core French, because there is a limited pool at the end of the day in terms of the number of educators available. So we couldn't, for example, foresee increasing access to core French in grade 1 and not doing capping in grade 1. So the two are connected because it's a limited number that we're talking about in terms of the pool of staff we have available. So if we were looking at starting it, doing something different in grade 2, like the access point would be grade 2 versus grade 1 in terms of French immersion, then that would provide us more flexibility in terms of core French teachers. Although one of the things we do know is that typically, while we will hire teachers who are qualified in French, of course, their collective agreement permits them to leave French as they're teachable. And so we do know that there's a higher attrition rate of educators as well from core French than French immersion. So that's something we will have to balance out. And I think Superintendent Lazarus spoke about the incentives that we're looking to create a very vibrant program in terms of additional vibrancy in terms of the core French programming and really providing those educators some unique opportunities along with their students. Does that answer the question, Mr. Morton?
That answers my question, and you have answered it very well. My second question has to do with secondary and the number of options our FI students have. So one of the respondents talked about the limited options at Port Perry High School. Well, I'm looking at the north and saying we have FI at Port Perry High School and again at Uxbridge Secondary. So could we provide better service to our students if we combined those two FI programs?
Thank you, Trustee Morton. One of the things we are looking at is not necessarily just combining those two programs, but certainly course sharing across schools. So if you have a school that has a plethora of courses that they're able to offer because of the enrollment in their school, we're hoping with what we've seen with the virtual learning this year, we can see if we can virtually share those courses among schools is one of the things that we really looked at, and we're enthusiastic about it. And we will be doing a couple of those next year. If we do have virtual learning again, we will be course sharing some of our French immersion program courses at the secondary level. And that would make it more equitable at the secondary level when you have that course sharing.
Thank you.
And I supplemental, Trustee Morton.
No, I just want to say that's a very important consideration, and I think we need to provide that to our students. Thank you.
Thank you. And Trustee Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't want to get too much into the mechanics of this. It's obviously complex no matter what program we're using, but I'm trying to get back to Maple Ridge, which was the infamous incident that sort of triggered this. And I'm wondering if the capping, that we have to have capping, does it have to do with making sure we don't run into that type of situation again? There's a nice simple one for you.
Thank you. I'll lead the way on that one, but happy to have supplementary comments from other staff. So that is the intention, Trustee Crawford. So if we don't cap, then we're subject to whatever the numbers come in, we then have to adapt. And so then that would potentially require more extensive boundary reviews and looking at a shrinking English program if the trend continues in the Durham region of increased requests for French immersion. So the intent behind the capping, again, is to keep it proportionate so that the English program remains vibrant in our schools, but that we're providing access points to French immersion, one through the capping in grade 1, and then one in grade 7 for the extended French program.
Thank you.
Director Marsh. Any additional comments? All right, let's move on to Trustee Barrett. Go ahead, Michael.
Thank you, Chair Thatcher. I have another number of comments, but I'd like to ask a question first, just with regards to financing of French in the province of Ontario. It's my understanding in discussions with the ministry and with Judith Nyman at OPSPA that and Canadian Parents for French, so we'll put that on the table for transparency, that the Durham board receives between $9 and $10 million to support a French language in under the Ontario GSNs, and that we receive $300 per every French immersion student under the grades 4, so that would be grades 1, 2, and 3, and $300 per year for every student that's in French immersion in grade 11 and 12. Where's that money spent? Is it earmarked for French language education, or is it absorbed into the general budget and distributed? Because I'll ask the question first. So,
Associate Director Wright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good question. I'd love to be able to answer it with great certainty. Unfortunately, we haven't tracked our budget in that way. So part of the review came with the realization that it's difficult for us, the way that we track our spending, to know exactly what is supporting the French immersion program. So to be honest, I don't have an answer for you, and I apologize for that.
Okay, no, that's all right. And I just might be suggest as a broader technique when we're talking about incentives and supports for French immersion within our board, that perhaps we're not using all dollars that are earmarked for the program. I understand it's not enveloped, so I get the meaning of enveloped, but that also means, in my estimate, there's about $10 million that come into the board that are spent supporting other programs, when we're sitting here talking about being able to make changes to the French immersion program and maybe not getting the full allocation of the dollars in order to be able to continue to enhance it. So I would just put that on the table. Just a couple of other pieces. I recognize that this report is really dealing with one element of the French immersion review. It's dealing with the whole concept of capping. It's not dealing with the other pieces that other trustees have raised with regards to, how do we attract teachers, although Superintendent Lazarus has spoken of that. It hasn't addressed the issue really of how do we retain teachers within core French, although we have talked about it in the sense of that there's difficulty. I think the last time we were told there's 329 teachers that are teaching in the English only program that have French qualifications. My concern with is that with 37 responses, it isn't an overwhelming additional wealth of information. And if I look through and I read through it, there really isn't an overwhelming support for the capping of the program. Understanding it's only 37 responses, and I understand that sometimes we have to lead as opposed to just to follow public opinion as well. Like I get that piece. But there are some very significant issues with capping. There are some very, I think, philosophical issues with capping when we're looking at a bilingual country, and now we're starting to be able to potentially take away that inherent ability of individuals. There are differences between the French program and the core French. We often talk about the attrition in French immersion, but yet we don't have a lot of data to say what's the attrition rate in core French, because I would suggest it's not any better. And an enhanced core French that we continue to be able to enhance or reinforce may not get us what we want to be able to do. And I'm all in support, as where's my Linda Stone? There you are, all in support of being able to have an enhanced core French. But the whole concept of capping, I think, is a very difficult piece. And I just can't see myself as supporting the capping piece. And again, I'll personalize it a bit. As a father of 6 kids that went through French immersion, I would probably have a 50-50 chance that each one of my kids would have been able, by a lottery system, be able to have actually entered the French immersion program. And I think that would be abominable when we divide families. And Toronto has a capping rule. I realize other boards have done that. They also have a sibling rule. KPR has no capping regulations. At what point are we going to start to balance out that we're actually going to lose more teachers? If I've had more emails from teachers over any item, it's been this one teachers being concerned about the core French, and if we make significant changes to French immersion, then it'd be just as easy to go to the neighboring board in order to be able to teach in a fully inclusive French immersion program. And I'm just wondering if we're just going to exasperate the shortages. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The last piece I'll say, I mean, I understand there's a broader context. There's a lot of things to be considered on April the 19th. It's just not about, and I recognize you're not looking for a recommendation or motion tonight. It's part of a broader conversation. But one of the pieces that I do have concerns about is we're actually going to start 3 cohorts of French language education in the Durham board. We're going to have an enhanced core French program starting in grade 1 or grade 2. I know there's some confusion over that. French immersion will continue starting in grade 1, and then we have a late immersion in grade 7. To me, that just adds more complexity to hiring teachers. Because once we get to high school, I'm not sure how you can have a grade 9 French immersion student in the same class as a late immersion grade 7 students who only studied French for 2 years, and then entering into a grade 9 class. Because to me, you're going to have 2 sets of courses, because you're not going to learn French language in 2 years enough to sit beside someone who's had French language since grade 1. I'm not so sure the same level of proficiency is going to be there. Now, I'm not the educator, but I'm just wondering if this isn't just creating even more complexity. We're already having difficulties being able to attract teachers and be able to have course offerings. I see, Nora, you had taken your off speaker. Maybe there's an answer to that broader question I have about the complexity and creating some more difficulties in creating 3 tranches of French education. Through you, Madam Chair. So.
For sure. Chair Thatcher, if it's okay, I will respond to that concern, because I recognize that is something that people do acknowledge as a concern in terms of what does it look like if I'm a grade 9 student. So traditionally, how those, having been in a secondary school where that is the way we operated, with where we welcomed in a late immersion cohort as well as an early immersion cohort. Typically what we tried to do was the French language offering, so the French class. We did actually try whenever possible to hold an extended and early immersion separate, but for all of their other courses, we combined the cohorts. And so what that meant was there was a greater variety of classes available to them because they were both extended and immersion. And there was never any concern. That was the accepted practice in terms of the differentiation, the universal design for learning. And there was no challenge in terms of those students in the extended programming. And in fact, the extended French program, you can graduate from grade 12 and be very successful in terms of your French acquisition. So there's lots of examples there provincially where that does happen. I'll also say that I recognize that the capping is something that is a challenge for sure in terms of whether or not people garner comfort with this notion. And I think that the challenge we have being a publicly funded institution is that there is a limitation in terms of the flexibility we have to meet the needs that we have. And so one of the questions we're going to have to grapple with as a growing board is, if the demand for French immersion continues to grow and we decide that the trustees decide we don't want to cap it, then the question is going to be, what do we do with those shrinking English populations within a school? And so I've been in a district, for example, where the numbers have really shrunk in terms of the English program, and that does have a significant impact then on the school. So either way, I think there's impact, and the question is going to be, how do we make our way through this in terms of strategic planning of French immersion within the district, knowing that there's no right or wrong. It's like pros and cons, whichever way you go. I think one of the things we've tried to position with the capping is that it wouldn't be a current reduction necessarily. So if we think about that, it will grow in pace with the district, and we're not looking at reducing the current offerings necessarily, but more or less trying to keep it status quo, and so that it can grow alongside the growth of the district. And that's, we felt, a respectful way of trying to meet the current interest in French immersion without necessarily negatively impacting English programming if that interest in French immersion were to go unchecked. But I agree with you, it is a challenging decision for the trustees ahead of them in terms of which way to manage it. It's a problem in Ontario in terms of the way that we have our school systems set up, and the funding in terms of limited number and limited spaces. One of the things we do know about is when it's the numbers of English students get so small, the stacking of those classes into multiple grades can really grow. And so that presents a unique set of challenges as well for that small population that's choosing the English program. And so it's just trying to figure out, how do we manage both interests.
And just a quick supplementary, if I could, Chair Thatcher, is you know, I certainly, you know, respect that, because I understand, of course, we're going to do this in a respectful manner. I would expect nothing less in order to be able to go forward. The only thing not the only thing, there's many things, because I recognize we can't do this in isolation. I don't believe you can have capping without attracting teachers. We have a significant issue across the province. You know, we have a significant issue. We can't do it without addressing the attrition, because, you know, and I've been in French immersion, not me, but my kids. I mean, because it was always the element that if a child started to struggle, the first response was, you need to get out of French immersion. So I'm not so sure how many supports we really have for French immersion kids to attract, etc. But one question I did have, Director Marsh, is in discussions with OPSPA, with Judith Nyman, etc., the late immersion, or pardon me, the late immersion grade 7 only exists in one school board, I understand, in the province of Ontario, and they're getting rid of it. So I'm not so sure now, unless I'm incorrect or the data's incorrect. I'm not seeing a huge success across the province on that late immersion. And don't get me, I'm not the pedagogy guy, I'm not the language, I'm not the educator. But if it isn't a popular model, why are we backing a horse that no one else is backing? So unless I'm incorrect, because I know you said you had experience, is that Ottawa Carleton, is it Limestone, is it, because I can't find it anywhere else at TDSB, and they're getting rid of it. They're in the cohorts of letting it die at this point.
Yeah, so I think the appeal for us in terms of the late immersion was the notion of wanting to acknowledge families' desire to have the opportunity for their children to experience an immersed French experience. And so looking from the K-12 journey, how do we do that? And so the idea of introducing the late entry was the idea that we wouldn't be closing the door if they didn't get accepted in grade 1, but it could mean that we proactively manage the English program in grade 1 to 6. And so I think that's the intent of it, is that we would do that. Now, in some districts, they had it limited very geographically in terms of the late immersion. And so the busing expenses became a barrier. So that was one challenge for many districts. I know that in some districts, they're undertaking French immersion reviews. And so whether or not they go back and revisit that as they see numbers shrinking in grades 1 to 6 in terms of the English program. So it's, from a pedagogical perspective, that was not a barrier in terms of that 7 to 12 extended French program. But there are other challenges, and one of them certainly is if you go with geographic hubs, the busing expense did become phenomenal in terms of access to those programs. So that would be one of the reasons potentially that some have moved away from it. Having been in the school, it worked extremely well, and it was never a challenge in terms of the students in the extended programming feeling like they weren't well prepared for their courses. But again, it's about balancing the English program, and if it shrinks too much, what are we going to do there? Because one of the things we do know is that families don't want to have a boundary review where they're driving past their local school because they're in the English program, because French immersion has grown so much. And that's the challenge we have as an English school board.
Thank you. Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. Some of my questions have been answered when replying to Trustee Barrett, but I just want to ask a question around if we have a school that, okay, has capped and there's increased growth in the community, therefore you will see that cap, and there was the comment about being able to apply to another school with an opening if that they had to provide busing, their own transportation. Well, that is an equity issue as far as I'm concerned for that, because not everybody can afford to have a vehicle to drive their child or their work schedule, whatever. It's an equity problem from that perspective. But the other thing is I'm just wondering if we have a huge wait list in a school as far as, or the possibility of a wait list, does that mean can we create a French immersion program at another school where we know we have capacity? And so we increase the number of French immersion schools within an area that it offers. Is that a possibility as well?
Take a crack at that one if you don't mind, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I think anything's possible within available resources. So I think we'd have to take a look and review the situation if that was the case, but the intention would be to manage the growth in line with the growth of the district. So I don't think the intention would be to create new dual track French immersion schools. But if we were able to attract and retain suitable number of teaching and support staff, then certainly I think that would be an option on the table. In terms of the transportation to an out-of-zone school being an equity issue, agree, but just want to highlight part of our conversation was that it is an optional program for families, and no perfect solution certainly, but that's how we reconcile that one. Thanks.
Thank you, Associate Director. Are there any further comments or questions? Trustee Barrett.
It's just a quick question about process, because we are coming up to April the 19th. Just wondering through you, Chair Thatcher, recognize that this was kind of a recommendation. Are we sitting in, not limbo, that's not a fair word. Will we see more information come forward, or are we just looking at potentially what we saw earlier this year coming forward April 19th with some specific capping recommendations? Just wondering about what the next steps are.
Thank you for that question.
Shall I jump in? Thanks, Chair Thatcher. So from staff's perspective, we're continuing. So for example, when we brought the first report to you, we understood that we needed to broaden and get more specific in terms of a report to you around what capping looked like. And so that was the intent of this evening. There are a number of things that when we bring the final report for your consideration that I think we'll need to flag. So for example, tonight, we've heard the question around siblings, right? So that will be something that when we're presenting that final report, we'll see what data we currently have available that might be helpful to you in terms of that sibling question, not promising that we necessarily would be able to access that kind of data, but having a look at it, because one of the questions we had is, depending on that sibling rule, would you really then be, once you were in, because of the number of children within a family, accessing the programming, would that seriously impact other access points for other families? Not sure if we can get that information or not, but we'll do that. There was a question around finances, and I think Associate Director Wright did say very clearly that it's very difficult because sometimes there are all sorts of expenses that are built in also that aren't necessarily explicit. So for example, is the child on a bus because they are specific to that program in terms of where they're traveling to, the cost of portables. So there's lots of, it's difficult, but what we'll try to do is present to you some of the financial implications in terms of where we are with that French funding that we receive. So we'll try to build in some of the questions that you have, understanding that what we bring forward to you is our recommendations, and there's a menu involved in this one, and some of them are attached and some of them aren't. So I think that will be the way we'll try to present it to you. So for example, you might choose capping, but you might say that you want siblings excluded from that process so that they are automatically enrolled, and you might have some recommendations in terms of transportation. So we'll have to try to figure out what those parts will look like in terms of the next report. But primarily the key recommendations from staff's perspective will remain fairly status quo, but trying to build in those pieces that will help in terms of the decision that trustees need to make, and presenting it in a way that you feel provides you sufficient information to make an informed decision. So we'll present a very similar report, but more detail where we're getting questions, similar tonight, where last time it was around the capping of the program that we received the most questions.
Thank you, Director Marsh. Does that answer your question, Trustee Barrett? All right, wonderful. I see no further questions or comments. As mentioned, we're not looking for a recommendation or a motion tonight. I'd like to thank trustees for bringing forward questions and comments from the community and from our families. It certainly will be a challenging decision for trustees. Back to your agenda, information items. 9B, moving on to the school naming policy and calling on Associate Director David Wright.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. At the January 18th board meeting, trustees did pass a motion to review the naming of schools policy. As per board direction provided in March 2020, regulations are being phased out. And so this evening, you'll see in your package a draft policy, as well as a draft procedure that will be replacing the former naming of schools regulation. Appendices A and C to the report are versions of the draft policy and procedure that include the original language struck out with newly added language in bold. Appendices B and D are clean versions of both the drafts. A group of 3 trustees and I did meet last week to review the draft policy. We did have a really good discussion. Hopefully, the changes that we discussed are accurately reflected, and if they're not, I'm sure they will point that out. Please let me know if I did miss any of those changes. The policy has obviously seen some significant changes, as you can tell by the amount of language that's been added. The draft policy includes criteria for initiating school name changes, which is new, as well as how that process unfolds. The draft process also sets out the criteria for school names to be considered. The procedure has also seen significant revision and is being provided for your information. The procedure includes a commitment in 6.2 that a school naming committee will reflect the diversity of the communities the Durham District School Board serves, as well as highlights what the general makeup of the committee should be. The role of the naming committee is included in 6.6 of the procedure and highlights that consultation on school names and school name changes should be undertaken broadly, with the options then narrowed through the work of the committee, with the naming parameters set out within the policy, with the top choice to be presented to trustees who will ultimately make the final decision on a school name change. So that's it in a nutshell. Happy through you, Madam Chair, to answer any questions. Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments for Associate Director Wright? Right, let's begin with Trustee Lundquist.
Thank you. I just have a couple of observations, if I may. So I don't want to take up a lot of time. I was one of the trustees that have already looked at this policy, so I'm not going to be lengthy in my commentary, but I did want to say that I think one of the there are challenges that go hand in hand. So I think our policies are sometimes unduly complex, and I prefer simplicity. So when I look at this policy, there are sections in here that, and I'm sorry because I tried to comment on it the first time around and didn't do a great job of it. But I actually think there are, sorry, I'm just trying to flip to the page while I talk. I think there are provisions in here that are not necessary and don't actually add to it. So for example, on page 21 under responsibilities 4.0, so there's a lengthy discussion about the role of trustees in terms of responsibilities and policy. And I don't think that adds anything to this document. I just think it should be removed entirely. I don't see the value in putting it in the policy. Those are our obligations pursuant to the Ed Act. Those aren't going to change, whether it's in the policy or not. That's what we're looking at. And that's also true of the Director of Education. So my view is that it just creates a big chunk of policy document that isn't necessary. And then the other observation I wanted to make was about the procedure. And I just wanted to say thank you because I had expressed some concern that there was potential for the composition of the committee to not reflect diversity. And I don't see that potential existing anymore. So I think it was a good amendment and I appreciate it. And I'm sorry about the cat meowing behind me. I know it's a little bit distracting, but I appreciate it. And I'm just going to say, although I was personally of the view that we should ditch naming of people, I was swayed by the argument that would entrench a status quo. So I guess my position on that at this stage is we're entitled to make mistakes in every community, and we likely will do so as a result, but I recognize that observation as holding some truth, so I'm not going to rally against it as I was planning on it. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Trustee Lundquist. Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. I was also on the committee, and I just wanted to know when I was actually one of the ones to ask the changes around the responsibilities, and I said it was to reflect the responsibilities in the Education Act, but I meant as it pertains to policy. So I agree that as far as some of the stuff should be taken out, but I really do think that in our policy it should be standard that what our responsibility is around policies. So like A1, A2, AB, I'm really looking at just the DE and a statement. What was there before, I think was fine, but it was around we develop and maintain and update and our policies, and the word develop wasn't there. So that's why I wanted to be reflective of our thing, because a lot of this other is not pertinent to this policy as far as I was concerned. So that was the only other comment I had on that section on both the policy and the procedure.
Thank you. And moving on to Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. I had taken my hand down. I just wanted to thank, that's okay. I just want to thank.
I just thought it might have automatically come down.
I just wanted to thank the board for the consideration around the naming piece around naming after individuals, because changing that would really affect I think some of the diverse opportunities for communities that are growing in Durham and Canada. So thank you for keeping that in and for giving that consideration. And my other question was, there used to be a trustee that was not in the not a part of the community that used to sit on the board. I just wondered what was the rationale behind taking out a trustee that was not in that community. Just a thought process for that change.
Through you, Madam Chair, happy to take a first crack, and then my friends that were on the committee, if you'd like to chime in, if I don't accurately capture, please do. It was really an intention to narrow the membership of the committee a little bit and give more voice to community than trustees. So we had a good conversation about, of course, the area trustees being represented, ensuring that there were at least 2 trustees. So there would be potential for a naming committee to have a trustee not from the area, if there was if it was a one area trustee, but really to provide greater voice to the community and just narrow the community to the trustees that really had a vested interest in naming that school. So thanks.
Thank you. Director Marsh.
I think the other thing, if I read the previous procedure correctly, is that the committee previously had a more significant role to play in terms of the final name, whereas this really turns it over to the Board of Trustees to make that final decision. And so from a representation perspective, given that the final decision and the 3 top names come to the Board of Trustees, there is a range of opportunities for all trustees to weigh in on the naming. And so not wanting the community consultation or the community school naming committee to feel like it's running parallel to the Board of Trustees and the decision that the Board of Trustees will come to make. So if there's too much representation on that school naming committee, and then the Board of Trustees have the final decision, it might be a question of how much representation there was at the initial stage to provide feedback to the entire board, understanding that the Board of Trustees do own this decision, and every single one of you will have input via that decision based at the board table.
Thank you, Director.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I just wondered what the thought process was behind it, but you're right, it does come to the board to make the final decision where it didn't before. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate the addition of the Indigenous Advisory Council as well. Thank you.
Trustee Morton, I'm not sure whether you took your hand down or not.
No.
No, go ahead, please.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I have a comment and then I have a question. Firstly, my comment is in regards to the guidelines and considerations in the procedure. I highly regard those comments regarding workplaces that are safe, welcoming, respectful, inclusive, equitable, and accessible, free of discrimination and harassment. I very much appreciate that. I also like 5.2, where recognizing the Indigenous rights are inherent and distinct. So thank you for including those guidelines and considerations. My question is around 6.2 in procedures. So in that naming committee, we've got the area trustees, no fewer than 2. But all of you know that we have one area where there is only one trustee representing Brock, Uxbridge, and Scugog. And hopefully in the next while the North would have an opportunity to name or rename a new school. So we would have to have an out of area trustee on that committee as a second trustee. And perhaps that wording could be built in there.
Thank you. Trustee Crawford.
Thank you. The document is much larger than I expected to be, and I realize we're probably not going to make a decision until it goes to board, but I'm wondering if we won't need more time on it. But one of the things that jumped out at me was the diversity issue, where we're trying to say we want it to be made up of, I guess, as many representative groups as we could, but at the same time, we're limiting the numbers. So aren't we going to run into a situation there where one or the other will have to vary?
If I may, Madam Chair, address that. So that was in 6.2, that was the intent of saying that the committee shall first and foremost reflect the diversity of the greater DDSB community.
Yes.
So that's the intention of that piece, to ensure that that is the overruling concept there. So one should not run into the other.
But has the size of the committee in the past been restricted to a certain number?
I do believe that the size of the committee was reflected in the previous procedure, yes.
Through you, Chair, it was in the previous procedure, there was a limitation in terms of the size of the committee, but I think one of the responsibilities that's clearly articulated in terms of the role of the committee is that it's actually a consultation vehicle to more voices within the community. And I think that's a really important articulation as well, in terms of an expectation that that school naming committee, it's not that the people around that table generate all of the thinking and the recommendation to the Board of Trustees for their consideration, but in fact, there's a very clear responsibility of consulting the broader community and then working with the data that comes back to them from the broader community.
Thank you, Director. I'm going to go to Trustee Barrett and then to Trustee Stone.
Thank you. And I just have a couple of comments. I would agree with Trustee Lundquist that I think that we could probably do without upon reflection on section 4, because I think that could be an overview to all of our responsibilities with regards to policy. It's just not necessarily applicable to this. It's applicable to all of our roles in policies. So I think we could probably do without it instead of having to repeat it in every policy. And just to address Trustee Morton's concern, 6.2 in the procedure is meant to establish that that there would be 2 trustees. I think the language is clear. So if there is a change in the number of representatives from the North, then there would be no fewer than 2. However, for example, in Oshawa, there's 3. If 2 individual trustees can't make it, then you'll have to add 1, because it could be no fewer than 2. So I think it lays it out that, you know, if there is no change, that an outside trustee would be added. There'd have to be a trustee added. I just wanted to add some commentary to the discussion with regards to how we've worked these in the past. Since you know, I've been around a long time. I don't want to leave the wrong impression that somehow trustees had a great deal of influence over the naming of the schools, because I don't want to leave that with the wrong piece, because we don't have a policy like the York Board, which is atrocious. Nor do we have parameters like the Peel Board. Every trustee who's been there 25 years gets a school named after them. We don't have those parameters, never have. We've had a very democratic approach. And at no point did trustees have an overwhelming of influence on the naming of the schools. And Trustee Stone, we've been on a few because we've opened a few schools in Oshawa. Because the way that it has worked is we've had numerous individuals and always have kept to the kind of concept of, at the end of the day, one person, one vote. So therefore, if you amalgamated a school, 3 schools into one, you had 12 students sitting there, you had multiple community members, and you would have 3 trustees. So the reality is that the amount of influence we had was very little. And not that I'm complaining, because as we mentioned in the subcommittee, I support that 100%. We are a voice for sure, because we are members of the community, but we are not the determinant of what occurs at that. And I'm glad, because that should not be our role. It is about the community first and foremost. And of course, the trustees have always had the decision, the ability to be able to overrule a recommendation that came to board. But in the almost 19 years I've served at this board, the trustees have never overridden the recommendation of the community. And I actually take pride in that, only in the sense that with the community voice is critically important. And I think this policy limits the numbers because I think that, you know, to be quite honest, you could not have an amalgamation. You shouldn't have 12 students determining necessarily everything that occurs. So I think it adds equity and balance to the policy. It addresses the issue of the renaming piece, which was not considered. So, but certainly, I think it goes a far way in being able to address the concerns that were raised by the community, and certainly gives a process by which schools' names can be reconsidered and strengthens the current process as well. I've been here, like I said, almost 19 years. This is school naming policy number 5 or 6 that I've been involved in. It just continues to reflect the changes in our community, which is an important thing, because it should. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Barrett. Trustee Stone, go ahead, Linda.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I just wanted to just talk about the vetting process of how you're going to vet the names that come forward in this world that we live in with social media. We're taking a chance when we put a name forward of somebody present, living now. And I mean, we can look back and we can name somebody, name a school after someone, and find later something on their social media, or find something that we wouldn't have ended up with that name. Anyway, I love the name Northern Dancer, and I'm going to stick to that, Michael Barrett. But that's probably not going to happen again. So I just wondered if you could comment on the vetting process that we're going to use. People are fallible.
That is the truth, Trustee Stone. I'll be honest and say we didn't get deep into conversation about the vetting process. My understanding, based on the way this is written, it would lie with the committee. So the committee, the school naming committee, would undertake a broad consultation within their community, gather names, and then the work of the committee would work to narrow down the selections and come down ultimately to one recommendation to trustees. So we haven't been specific about the work of the committee and how it would be vetted. I would hope that being chaired by the family of school superintendent, they could bring a lens to vetting and doing a significant background check on any name being brought forward. That being said, if there are trustees that have previously been involved in the school naming committees, perhaps there's a process that's worked previously that we might be able to leverage, or if you'd like, we could certainly do a jurisdictional scan to see what other school boards that build a lot of schools do to make sure that they're doing as much research as they can, understanding that there will be one rock potentially left unturned. Thanks.
Thank you. And going to Trustee Lundquist.
So I'm going to be really, really brief. I'm just looking at the procedure, and in the procedure, I actually take Carolyn Morton's point, because as I read 6.2a, it says the area trustee, and then in brackets, no fewer than 2. So language-wise, it actually does need to be adjusted, I think, just so it says something like, and another trustee, so there are no fewer than 2 trustees on every committee, something like that. So I actually think her observation is correct in terms of the language in the procedure, and I recognize procedure is not our domain, but it would be better to clean it up. I agree with that.
Thank you. And Trustee Edwards.
Just was going to talk on the vetting process, and that having sitting on a few naming committees myself, in that it was really up to staff to look at the names and look at based on the attributes we have already put in, whether they met the criteria or not. And I don't know. So I'm just trying to look at that section where it's a prominent person, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the criteria that it had to fit. So it was the naming committee that did that vetting process as part of, as long as they met the criteria, obviously. And then when it comes to the renaming, we've dealt with that as well, because if a situation has changed, then it's a matter of being able to, the community saying that it doesn't no longer, based on those criteria, no longer fits. And we would like the school renamed as the application we put in to have it renamed.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. I am seeing no further comments or questions around this school naming policy. So I'm moving on to 9C, the student trustee report. And we'll just give a moment for our student trustees to turn on their cameras. Here we are. I'm just wondering who's going to go first tonight. Thank you, Logan.
Through you, Chair. At our February 8th Student Senate meeting, we had the opportunity of having Director Marsh come and speak to the senators and clear up any questions they had. Questions regarding Chromebooks, guidance, co-op programs, and accessibility in the schools were answered. During the meeting, we also got a chance to do breakout groups and give feedback on the compendium of action for Black student success. Thank you to Simone Taylor and Principal McIntosh for running the session and allowing the Senate a chance to provide feedback. At the end of our meeting, our Durham District School Board Student Senate and the Durham Catholic District School Board Student Senate came together for a games night where the senators got a chance to meet the senators from the other board and participate in activities together.
On Wednesday, February 24th, the Student Senate had the opportunity to host an elementary leadership conference virtually. We had over 112 elementary students registered for the event, and across the 3 sessions, we had a minimum attendance of 45 people in each call. This includes the attendees, guest speakers, organizers, facilitators, and staff supervisors. We'd like to extend a special thank you to all of those involved in making this conference possible. Through the event, we were able to learn how the Senate can better support elementary students with resources about transitioning to high school and providing leadership opportunities through more events like the conference to continue fostering student voice.
Thank you, Priya. And from February 18th to the 21st, we had the opportunity to engage in the OSTA ACO Board Council conferences. The 4 days were filled with speakers, breakouts, and engagement opportunities for student trustees across Ontario. The focus of these conferences was the work of both the Catholic Board Council, CBC, and the Public Board Council, PBC. As the communications officer of PBC, I worked to receive feedback from different regions on the wellness position paper we're currently developing, and we plan on rolling that out during Mental Wellness Week. We also broke out into working groups to focus on individual initiatives, and we addressed OSTA's advocacy project, Volume of Our Voices, which is continuing to receive student input on their experiences with COVID-19, cultural diversity, and gender identity. With that, if there are any questions, we would be happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments for our student trustees tonight? Trustee Morton.
This is not a question, it's a comment. I just want to commend you on the event that you hosted on February 24th with our elementary students. You did a great job, and I thoroughly enjoyed listening to your guest speaker, Brian Jones, talking about the importance of leadership. That was a well-organized, orchestrated event. Thank you.
And Trustee Barnes.
Thank you. I attended the elementary panel as well. That was very well done. I thought students had some really great questions in regards to leadership that were well answered. I think they might have needed just a little bit more time with the amount of questions that they had. So that was very great engagement. I also wanted to thank the Senate for facilitating the conversations around the Compendium for Black Student Success. That also was a very engaging and very revealing piece to have student voice within that new update for the compendium. So thank you for doing such a great job. Their feedback was very positive and the students were very engaged, and I want to thank you a lot for facilitating that.
Thank you, Logan, Arpita, and Aaliyah. I see no further questions. So moving on the agenda, item 10, committee reports. A call on Trustee Barnes for the Equity and Diversity Ad Hoc Committee meeting report.
Thank you. The report and minutes for the January meeting is found on pages 35 to 36. I just need to give a little bit of an update on the report that the meeting that happened on January 17th. The Student Senate did speak to the Compendium for Black Student Success update. So we've started with our community consultations, and we're working on engaging community feedback on the compendium, going back to the community and letting them know the items that the board has put into place. We're trying to assess, of course, if the work that we've done is really hitting the students' best. So we're really trying hard to gauge that conversation around the impact of the work that we've done. We've also gotten we're working on the terms of reference for the committee. We're going through the second iteration of reviewing it and coming up with new terms going forward. The student census, we've gotten an update on. The board has also gotten a presentation on, and so we're going forward with taking that information out to community, sharing that information, and trying to get our communities to be involved so that the next round of census will get a greater turnout. So that is my update, unless there's any questions or comments for that.
I see no questions or comments. Trustee Barnes, thank you for your report. Moving on to 10B and calling on Trustee Stone for the Governance Ad Hoc Committee meeting report.
Thank you, Chair. Trustees and staff continue to work on the board's code of conduct and board bylaws, keeping them up to date and adjusting wording where required. As well, discussions took place around the process for new policies and around types of committees, defining committees, etc. That those meeting minutes can be found, as you can see, from page 37 to 47. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Stone. Are there any questions or comments for Trustee Stone? Seeing none. We have no correspondence or other business tonight. Be there no further business before the board, the meeting does now adjourn. Thank you, everyone. Good night.